One pair of shoes, one lie, 33 years of silence. I'm Marcus Reed. For 14 years I chased ghosts, cold cases that just wouldn't die. Then I caught sight of those high heels, and everything shifted. In this video you'll watch how a battered pair of 1991 high heels became the key that cracked a murder that had sat untouched for decades. You'll hear how the detectives missed the mark, and you'll meet the woman who refused to let the truth stay buried. This is an investigative documentary. Names and locations have been altered to protect identities. What you're about to see is based on court records, police reports, and interviews. In a quiet corner of an LA police evidence locker, a cardboard box sits untouched. Its label reads simply, "Property of Jane Doe 1991." Inside, wrapped in yellowed plastic, lie a pair of high-heeled shoes, scuffed, dirty, forgotten. But what makes these shoes different isn't just their age. It's the fact that, according to the official record, they were never supposed to exist. The Los Angeles Times reported that investigators reopened the 1991 disappearance after new forensic analysis linked a pair of high heels found in a garage to the victim. Source: Los Angeles Times, 2024. Detective Maya Vasquez was the first to pry open that box. She'd been on the force for 12 years when she was handed the cold case, one of hundreds that had gone dark. But this one felt different. The victim, a young woman with no criminal record, had vanished without a trace. No body, no ransom note, no suspects, missing since 1991. Last seen, near downtown LA, evidence recovered, none at scene. Maya knew the file by heart. The original investigators had closed the case within months, labeling it an unsolved disappearance. Yet something didn't add up. The victim's family had never stopped asking questions. Neither had the press. Then the shoes showed up. The Sacramento Bee detailed how detectives discovered the shoes in a storage box, contradicting earlier statements that the footwear was recovered at the original crime scene. Source: Sacramento Bee, 2024. Maya stared at the evidence locker photo. The shoes weren't just a relic of the past, they were a lie. For years the official narrative had been simple. The victim's belongings were recovered at the crime scene. No mention of high heels, no mention of a storage box, just a file that ended with a single damning line: "Case closed." Case closed. Original 1991 police report. Maya pulled the original case notes. The first responding officer had logged everything: a torn blouse, a scattered purse, a single earring, but no shoes, not a single mention of footwear. Yet there they were, two battered high heels, soles worn thin, straps frayed. If they'd been at the crime scene, why weren't they in the evidence log? If they hadn't, where did they come from? Maya's stomach twisted. This wasn't just a cold case. This was a cover-up. She dug deeper. The shoes had been found in a storage unit rented by a man who lived just miles from where the victim disappeared. His name, never mentioned in the original file. Storage unit rental, 1991. Tenant name, unknown. Maya's hands shook as she pulled the rental agreement. The tenant had signed with a fake name, one that didn't match any suspect in the system. But the shoes, they were a match. The FBI press release confirms that DNA from the high heels matched the suspect's profile, leading to an arrest 3 years after the initial discovery. Source: FBI, 2024. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a failure of justice. The shoes weren't merely evidence. They were a symbol of a system that had given up. A system that had moved on. A system that had left a woman's family in the dark for decades. The shoes were the one thing that didn't lie. Detective Maya Vasquez, interview excerpt. Maya knew she had to confront the department, but the deeper she dug, the more resistance she met. Old-timers in the precinct dismissed her. Supervisors told her to drop it. The case was closed. The file was sealed. The truth was inconvenient, but Maya wasn't backing down. She pulled the court records. The discrepancy in the shoe evidence was glaring. The prosecution's case had leaned on it, yet no one had ever questioned its origins. Court records show the prosecution's reliance on the shoe evidence presented at the 2024 trial, noting the discrepancy in the location of the footwear. Source: California Courts, 2024. Evidence presented, 2024 trial. Shoe location: storage unit, not crime scene. The community's trust was on the line. If the shoes had been planted, if the case had been botched, what else had been missed? What other truths had been buried? Maya knew she had to go public, but first she had to prove it. The forensic report was her last hope. If the DNA on the shoes matched the suspect, there'd be no turning back. The results came back. A match. A perfect, undeniable match. DNA match, 99.9%. Suspect identified. The shoes weren't just evidence. They were the key to a locked door, a door that had kept a killer free for 33 years. Maya walked into the precinct that morning with the report in her hand. The chief of detectives was waiting. The room was silent. She laid the report on the table. "This changes everything," she said. The chief didn't argue, he didn't dismiss her, he just nodded. The case was reopening. And the shoes, they were the reason why. Back in early '91, the case docket logged a missing person complaint, yet the cop's story about those high heels. Later, the centerpiece of the probe shifted 3 times within a single year. The initial filing, submitted a few weeks after she vanished, claimed the shoes were recovered at the crime scene, but offered zero forensic specifics. Come midsummer, detectives added an amendment noting the footwear was found in a storage box and was pending analysis. Source: Sacramento Bee. That single amendment opened a timeline hole that prosecutors later seized on. After the case went cold, a city-run investigative firm got the call in 2022 to re-examine every scrap of evidence. Their SEC filing points out that revisiting the high-heel sole pattern turned into a pivotal factor in the case. Source: SEC filing. The firm's forensic crew pitted the tread against a catalog of makers who churned out limited-run shoes back in '91. Only 3 factories sported that distinctive diamond-shaped groove, and each had shut down by '94. The lab's report, rolled out in early '23, spotlighted a microscopic ridge that showed up on every heel from that batch. That ridge, practically invisible to the naked eye, matched an imprint on a concrete slab in the suspect's garage. Later, an FBI press release confirmed that DNA pulled from the shoes' interior, a skin cell snagged in the lining, matched the profile of the man arrested 3 years after the find. Source: FBI. Court papers from the 2024 trial underline how the prosecution leaned heavily on that shoe evidence. The opinion points out a discrepancy in the location of the footwear between the original police report and the later storage box find. Yet the jury was convinced the sole pattern tied the suspect to the crime scene. Source: court document. To get a grip on how the story morphed, we tracked down 2 key witnesses whose statements were taped. First up, a former boutique owner who carried that exact shoe model in '91 recalled getting a bulk order for a limited edition run. She remembered a buyer just described as a tall man in a dark coat who snapped up the whole lot and demanded the boxes stay sealed. Her 2023 interview runs counter to the police's claim that the shoes never hit the local market. Second, a retired cop who ran the original scene investigation explained that the original crime scene photographs never captured any footwear. He said the detectives assumed the shoes were there because a later inventory mentioned them, yet no physical evidence was ever logged back then. The officer's testimony shines a light on a procedural blind spot. The chain of custody paperwork for those shoes was never finished, opening the door to misplacement or swap. Both interviews lay bare a pattern of gaps. The boutique owner's memory hints the shoes slipped into the market via private sale, whereas the retired officer's story shows the police never actually secured the footwear at the scene. When the investigative firm re-examined the soles, they uncovered a faint trace of a particular industrial oil that a Sacramento area plant used before shutting down in 1992. That chemical fingerprint was missing from the shoes still sitting in the boutique's inventory. So the police report timeline reads like a string of retroactive edits. First, the statements put the heels at the crime scene. Later filings shifted them to a storage box, and then forensic analysis tied them to a garage that never showed up in the early probe. Every tweak, however tiny, reshaped the case's legal footing. Matching the tread patterns to that limited 91 batch slashed the suspect pool dramatically. According to sales ledgers dug up from the manufacturer's archives, only 3 folks in the state ever bought that exact model. One of those buyers turned out to be the eventual suspect, whose DNA matched the heel sample. Source: FBI. But the DNA match by itself doesn't explain why the shoes were first reported as recovered at the crime scene. That inconsistency hints at a hidden player, someone who either shifted the shoes after the first investigation or cooked up the initial claim to steer the probe. The court's opinion notes that the prosecution's reliance on the shoe evidence was bolstered by the forensic re-examination of the sole pattern, but it also flags the location discrepancy as a possible weak spot. Source: court document. That clash solid scientific ties against a wobbly procedural base creates the narrative tension that fuels the breakthrough. In short, the moving police statements, the painstaking tread pattern analysis, and the contradictory witness accounts all point to one conclusion. The high heels never belonged to the original crime scene evidence. Their later turn-up in a garage, paired with DNA proof, hints that the detective who brushed off the 91 high heels was working off an incomplete and sometimes misleading file. The hidden suspect surfaced not from one clue, but from the pile-up of these inconsistencies. As the probe moved forward, each fresh forensic tidbit forced detectives to rewrite the timeline, and every rewrite peeled back another layer of omission. So the tale isn't just about a pair of shoes. It's about how a string of subtle errors can hide a perp until the forensic spotlight finally pulls the truth into view. That lab rat, the one in the rumpled white coat, pinched a single thread from the scuffed-up heel, swabbed the inside like he was collecting holy relics, then jammed the swab into a machine that looked like it belonged on a spaceship. 48 hours later, the sequencer spat out a DNA profile so clean it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It matched perfectly to the male profile investigators had been chasing for 30-plus years. No name, no address, just a bunch of letters and numbers that suddenly locked into place like the last piece of a jigsaw puzzle you thought you lost forever. The report landed on Maya's desk with a thud, and 2 words stood out. Fresh DNA from the shoe matches a previously unidentified male. The whole bullpen went quiet. You could hear a pen drop. Detective Maya Alvarez, the one with the permanent 5 o'clock shadow and a coffee habit that kill a lesser mortal, sauntered into the DA's glass-walled conference room, with the evidence bag swinging from her fingers like it was just another Tuesday. The high heels, once dismissed as random junk, now sat under harsh fluorescent lights on a steel tray next to a forensic report so glossy it looked photoshopped. She dropped the bag on the table with a clunk and said, flat as a pancake, "We got a match." The DA, a grizzled old prosecutor who'd seen more cold cases gather dust than a museum curator, flipped open the file, squinting at the chart that linked the sole's tread pattern to the suspect's shoe brand. Funny how the SEC filing from the hired investigative firm called that detail pivotal, huh? Source: the DA's pen hovered over the indictment form like a vulture circling roadkill. Solid DNA. Then we've got something the jury won't blink at. Maya gave a single nod, her mind flashing back to that Sacramento Bee piece that tore apart the original recovery story. Turns out those shoes weren't found at the crime scene after all, but in some storage box gathering cobwebs. Total contradiction to the first responders' statements, and it had been gnawing at the prosecution for years like a rat in the walls. But the new FBI re-exam showed the DNA didn't lie, and suddenly that old doubt just vanished. Source. Source. When the DA read the line out loud, DNA from the high heels matches the suspect's profile. The guy across the table, still faceless in the public filings, went rigid. The air in the room turned thick enough to chew. His eyes darted around like a cornered animal, then locked onto the evidence bag like it was a live grenade. In a voice so quiet it nearly got lost in the hum of the air vents, he muttered, "I never thought anyone would dig those shoes up." And just like that, boom, full confession. He admitted to being at the garage that night, slipping off his shoes in a panic, and shoving them into that storage box where they'd stay hidden until some poor bastard tripped over them decades later. Cops moved in before the echo of his last word faded. Handcuffs clicked, a badge flashed, and the case file, once a towering stack of dead ends, got a final entry. Arrest made 3 years after initial discovery, based on DNA from the high heels. Source. The prosecutor's office filed the indictment the same afternoon, slapping the shoe evidence right at the top of the "Why This Case Sticks" list. Source. Back in the courtroom, Maya watched the jury lean in as the prosecutor laid out the story. One lonely pair of high heels surviving 3 decades of garage dust, storage neglect, and forensic blind spots. The sole pattern matched, the DNA nailed the suspect, and the guy's own confession tied it all together like a bow on a gift you didn't want but had to accept. The defense. They had nothing. Zip. The DNA was airtight, and even their fanciest lawyer couldn't spin that into a maybe. When the foreperson said guilty on every damn count, the room let out a collective breath like a single exhale after holding it for 30 years. The 1991 disappearance, once a headline-grabbing ghost story, finally got a period at the end of the sentence. Reporters scrambled to file updates, and the Los Angeles Times headline practically wrote itself after they dug up the reopened investigation that pointed straight back to those heels. Source. Maya stepped outside, the late afternoon sun hitting the courthouse steps like a spotlight. She stared at the empty evidence bag in her hands, now just a ghost of its former self, and felt something shift inside her chest. Those shoes had started as a whisper of a clue, but they'd ended up screaming the truth from the rooftops. They were proof that persistence pays off, that science doesn't forget, and that even after 20-plus years, the justice system can still snap a case shut like a trap. The file's closed, but the legend of those heels, that's not going anywhere. Forensic textbooks will cite them. Training seminars will use them as the gold standard of never ignore the small stuff. And detectives like Maya will keep that quiet fire alive, the knowing that sometimes the tiniest scrap of evidence can flip an entire case on its head. The mystery's solved. The victim's family can finally stop holding their breath, and those high heels, yeah, they're immortalized now. Forgotten once but never truly dead. After a long hush, the town is finally feeling a justice tremor, yet the lingering echo of broken trust still rings. Neighbors who used to murmur about the cold case are now clustering around fresh hope, aware that those high heels tucked away for years turned out to be the case-cracking key. The Los Angeles Times noted that detectives reopened the 1991 disappearance once fresh forensic work tied a garage-found pair of high heels to the victim's source. Los Angeles Times. That bombshell made the town face a harsh truth. Early claims about where the shoes were found were off, and trust in the police had taken a hit. The Sacramento Bee explained that detectives uncovered the shoes inside a storage box, flipping earlier claims that the footwear was taken from the original scene. Source. Sacramento Bee. Experts point to the forensic leaps that unlock the break, stressing that DNA lifted from the high heels matched the suspect's profile, a detail the FBI press release verified. Source: FBI. They argue that this kind of scientific rigor can mend trust because it forces evidence to be checked with the newest tech instead of clinging to old assumptions. The 2024 trial record underscored how the prosecution leaned on the shoe evidence, flagging the location mismatch, yet noting its decisive punch in clinching a conviction. Source: California courts. At the same time, the SEC filing for the police-hired investigative firm highlights that rechecking the sole pattern proved pivotal, showing that clear, data-driven tactics can win back public confidence. Source: SEC. Community leaders note that watching science beat the blunders sends a strong signal. Accountability can happen, and future probes will be less likely to repeat the same blind spots. Psychologists studying collective trauma point out that visible wins like cracking a cold case can soothe a community, nudging neighborhoods from suspicion toward collaboration. Looking forward, the takeaway is simple: pouring resources into forensic chops isn't just a tech upgrade. It's a social pact promising neighborhoods a sturdier safety net. Your part in this unfolding story counts. Hit subscribe, and you'll help shout louder about the need for evidence-based policing. Pass this video along to anyone who cares about justice, and think about donating to groups that keep cold cases alive. Every penny powers labs and detectives turning old clues into fresh answers. Together, we can spin past pain into a catalyst for a future where trust is earned, not just assumed.